Hello, good people. Today we're going to continue our Comfyui 101 series, and we're going to tackle how to create an upscale workflow. What you see on the screen is what we're going to create today, and I'm going to give you a few small tips on how to organize them so that it functions in an efficient way. I'm going to zoom in here quite tightly here and just give you a quick little preview of what we're going for here. Here's the before, here's the after. Notice things like her eyes and how detailed it is, the texture of the skin. And then if we look at the little details here, sort of like a worn kind of armor, look how the details pop. And yeah, we're going to work towards this today. As always, we need some custom nodes, and we also need a particular lora. Now, if this happens to be your first time watching one of my videos, this is a series of videos, so if you know nothing about Comfyui, I encourage you to watch those other videos. There are some things I'm going to talk about that you'll have to know, okay? As always, everything you need will be linked in the description below, and I have this Google Doc of all the Flux models and text encoders and things like that. And today we're going to use the FluxDev FP8 all-in-one model. If you've been following me, you should have downloaded this already. You can use the UNet version or the GGUF versions, but what I want you to do is download this FluxDev Turbo Alpha LoRa. And you can actually even use the Hyper LoRa as well. I'd encourage you to download them both. So if we click on this link here, it's going to send us to the Hugging Face page. You can just click this copy button. You'll see the model here. It's called Diffusion PyTorch model. So when you click download, you want to install this in your LoRa folder. And then here you can rename it. Just paste it into the file name and then delete the part before it so that you just have Flux Turbo Alpha, and then go ahead and save that. Same thing with the Hyper LoRa. You can click on the link. You can download both the 8 and 16 step. You could even use them for regular generations. Click the download button here, save it into your LoRa folder. Next, we need the upscale models, and I've uploaded 3 to a Google folder. And I encourage you to download all 3. We're probably just going to use this one today, but I'm including these as options because you may prefer one over the other. And what you want to do is click on the 3 dots, click on download, and in your main Comfyui folder under models, you'll see a folder for upscale models. That's where you want to put these files into, okay? Now within Comfyui, there are quite a few custom nodes that we need to install. Let's go ahead to the top and click on Manager. Select Custom Nodes Manager. As always, make sure Comfyui is updated to its latest version. One you want is called DetailDaemon. You see it here. Go ahead and install that as well. The next one is called UltimateSDUpscale. Go ahead and install that one. And then the last one is called Flux Continuum. This is only going to be a very small part of our workflow, but in a very later future video, this is actually going to be really cool because you can set up like a modular interface. So go ahead and install this one as well. Now, this workflow we're about to build can be used for both SDXL and Flux. However, I'm going to focus mostly on Flux. So to start off, we need our basic nodes. And instead of going to add node and finding them in the menu, we can go ahead and just double click and search for them, since by now you should be familiar with doing that. So the first thing we want is the load checkpoint node. So just type in load. You'll see the preview on the left here. Now I am choosing to use all-in-one models. Again, it's up to you if you want to use the UNet versions or the GUF versions. Now, if you recall, the all-in-ones have the UNet model, the clip, and the VAE built in, so we don't need to load that. Next, we want our clip text encoder, so let's just pull it out from here and select clip text encoder. That way it's already connected. And we'll do the same for the negative prompt. And we're only putting in a negative prompt box if we're going to use SDXL. Flux doesn't really need it. And while we're here, we might as well give it a color of our choice just to determine which is which. Now let's move this over, and we're going to double click once again, type in Flux guidance. Go ahead and connect the conditioning to conditioning, and we'll leave it at 3.5 and resize it. And before we move any further, let's go back to this area here. We need to load the upscale model. Let's go ahead and right click anywhere, click on add node. Under loaders, because we want to load the upscale model, you'll see on the very bottom, load upscale model. Now, if we take a look here, you see upscale model. This is where we can select the one we're going to use. And we can't connect it just yet because we don't have our sampler. So we'll get to that in a second. Now, since we're doing an upscale workflow, we need a load image node. So again, let's double click here and type in load image. There it is at the top. And we'll just put it aside for now. All right, so this is where we start venturing into the new territory. So let's add the sampling node, and this time the sampler is going to be a little bit different. Let's right click, add node, image. You'll see a section here for upscaling, and the one we want to use is UltimateSDUpscale Custom Sample. We can resize it just a tad here, and let's move it over quite a bit here. Now you'll see some familiar inputs here for model, positive, negative, VAE, but there are some extra ones here which we'll talk about in a second. For now, let's first connect the image input. So we want to take the image input from here. Let me drag it over, and we want to connect it there. We can go ahead and put that aside once again. This time I'm not going to reroute any of the connections because we're going to rearrange it right after. So don't worry about that right now. But we can go ahead and connect this conditioning to positive and then this conditioning to negative. Oh, actually, before we go any further, we also want to install the LoRa loader. So double click and just type in power. You'll see power LoRa loader. We've used this in the past. So let's go ahead and put it in between the checkpoint and clip texting code. So let's select these, move them over, put this guy over here, and we can connect model to model, clip to clip. And then from the LoRa loader, we want to connect the clips to both positive and negative. We'll load the model later. Okay, let's make a little bit of room here. And then we can connect the VAE from the checkpoint loader. So let's grab it from here. There you go. Next, we want to take the upscale model input and connect it to the sampler here. So let's go ahead and do that. And yes, the mess of the noodles is giving me anxiety, but it's okay. We're going to fix that. I'll get to the settings of the sampler once we're done, but I'm not going to go in depth. We're only going to talk about things to get you running. And in a separate video, I'll go through all the details in depth. But for now, we have custom sampler here and custom sigmas. So let's zoom in here, and I'm going to right click, add node, sampling, custom sampling, and under samplers, you're going to see this one, DetailDaemon Sampler. That's the custom node that we installed. And let's put this underneath just to kind of separate it for now. And what we're going to do is actually take out the sampler, the scheduler, some of the settings, and create our own sampler nodes. So once again, let's right click, add node, sampling, custom sampling, and then under samplers, we just want this one here, K-sampler select. This node allows us to pick the individual sampler only, okay? Now, along with this, we need a scheduler. They go hand in hand. Let's go into the same area, add node, sampling, custom sampling. At the top, you'll see schedulers. The one we need is a basic scheduler. So if we look at the options here, you see we have Keras, Exponential, SGM Uniform, the typical schedulers, okay? And then we have our step counts and denoising. So let's resize this. And then the last thing we need is a node called model sampling. So let's go ahead and right click, add node, advance. Under models, you'll see this one, model sampling flux. Let's go ahead and click that. We'll go over all these settings and what they're for once we complete the workflow. But for now, let's arrange this. So let's put the K-sampler over here. And if you'll notice, we have two inputs. So let's connect those. And let me move this guy out of the way. and then we have the sampler input here. So obviously we need to connect that to the custom sampler input right here. So we'll go ahead and connect that to there. And let's make some room, push these guys aside. And then these two go together. So we have the modeling sampling going into the basic scheduler. So model to model. And then we have the input for sigmas right here, which we will connect to custom sigmas right here. Okay. So let me drag that up and we're going to connect those two together. Let's make some more room over here and bring these up. Put this guy over here. So right now we have two model inputs that we need to connect. Connect the model input from the lora loader to both the sampler right here and also to model sampling flux right there. So let's connect this one first and we'll grab the same input and bring it all the way over. The final two nodes we need are the output images. So the first one, as always, we'll just pull this out and select Save Image. And we may as well go ahead and resize this. I like to make it square and fairly big. And then the final node, let's right click, Add Node under RG3, which you should have installed already from previous videos. And way at the bottom here, you're going to see image compare. That's how we're going to do the A-B side-by-side comparison. Now you'll notice you have two image inputs here. We can connect the original image to either A or B. It's really up to you. I like to put it in A. So what we need to do is connect this image input to image A. Now, just for the sake of showing you, I'm actually going to bring this over here and we're going to slide it into image A. So it's going to display the original image. Then we're going to slide this back over. And what we want is the upscaled image to compare. So we're going to take it from the sampler from this image output and connect it to image B. Now, before we get into the settings and testing, let's go ahead and give these some color. Let's start with the model. We want to select our FP8 model, or if you choose GGUF or the individual unit models, you can load them as you normally do. The upscale model, we're going to use this one, NMKD CX. For the LoRa, we want to click Add LoRa. We're going to use the Turbo Alpha. And basically what this LoRa is, it's like Flux Dev, but you can generate in only 8 steps. And we're going to take advantage of this because this whole upscale process can do it with only steps. You can increase it to 4 to 8 for different details, but generally 2 steps works fine. So the strength we're going to leave at 1. That works great. Go ahead and enter a prompt that you want to use. And while we're here, we might as well put in the image that we want to upscale. There we go. Flux guidance, we're going to leave it at 3.5. Sampler, we're going to use Euler. For this node, model sampling flux, leave everything on default. And scheduler, you can use normal, simple, or beta. I'm going to use beta. For steps, we're going to put in 2. And denoising, we're going to set to 0.3 for now, just to start. And for the custom sampler settings, you can upscale it by 2, 3, 4, whatever. I'm going to just do it at 2. We can leave the seed at randomize. The steps will be overridden by the custom sampler, but if you just want to be safe, just mimic what you put in the other node. CFG, we're going to set to 1. You could probably put CFG up to 2 as well, but for now, we'll go to 1. Again, these will be overridden, but just in case I put them in. Denoising will also be overridden. Mode type, linear. Basically what's going to happen is that when the upscale happens and the generation happens, linear basically goes from left to right, but can be prone to sort of like scan lines. If we select chess, it does a checkerboard pattern upon generation. I tend to use this mostly, so we'll leave it at that. And then there's none, where it just takes the whole thing. but I don't find it's too effective. Would only use none if you want a very slight change. And traditionally, what you would normally do here is put 1024 by 1024. So when you're upscaling it, it generates in tiles and stitches them together. But we're not going to do that in this case, because when you do that using Flux, it tends to leave seams that are very visible. And even though there are options here to fix the seams and denoise it, it's still pretty noticeable. So instead, what we're going to do is put the actual size of our image in here. So I want to upscale it times 2. So if you want to do it 3 or 4, you can times it by that. I'm just going to put 2, and it's going to calculate the width for you. So in this case, 1664, and we'll do the same for height. So I've got 1152 times 2, which gives me 2304. All these other settings pertain to more if we're going to do that tiled pattern upscaling. So I'm going to save that for another video because we really don't need this stuff right now. The only thing I'll encourage you to change is set force uniform tiles to true and tiled decode to true. Now let's take a look at the DetailDaemon Sampler. This node is going to help us with the sharpness and details. And I'm just going to cover the things we need today, all right? The first setting here, detail amount, pretty self-explanatory. How much detail do we want? With Flux, you can go from anywhere from 0.1 to 1. But I find even a value of 0.5 in a lot of cases is way too aggressive. So a good starting point, I would say, is anywhere from 0.2 to 0.3. And if you find that you're still getting too much detail, you can also put a negative factor. And you may need to do that with like close-up portraits, because this node is actually very aggressive in terms of the sharpening. But for now, I'll leave it at 0.2. Now, a start and end step is where these details are applied during the generation process. The lower amounts takes care of the details that are larger, and closer towards the end is where the smaller details are added. So at the maximum, I would say in most cases, you can go 0.1 to 0.9, and that'll sort of give you an overall enhancement in sharpness and detail. Personally, I like to go from 0.2 to 0.8 because if you start at 0.2, it sort of keeps a little bit of the original image in the beginning, takes care more of the middle details, and then before it gets to the finer details at 0.8, it cuts off. That way it's not too aggressive. Everything else here, we don't need to touch. The defaults work fine. The only thing I would probably change here is this setting called smooth. If we put it in true, if we think of a graph on how these details are applied, when we toggle this on to true, it's more of a smooth gradual effect. Now, if I've connected everything properly, and if we go ahead and run this, it should work. So at this point, go ahead and click on Q. Make sure there's no errors. And with 2 steps, depending on your GPU, my system with a 3060 Ti, 8 gigabytes of VRAM, the upscale process is pretty quick for my system, typically around 40 to 50 seconds. So if you have a better GPU, this should only take like 10, 20, 30 seconds. So we'll have the upscaled image here, and then we have the before and after slider here. So if we zoom in, again, if we focus on something like the eyes and the mouth, see how much more detail we're getting. The texture of the skin isn't too aggressive with the current setting we're using. It really depends on your image, the model you're using. It may take a little bit of tweaking on those settings, but for the most part, this is a good start. Okay, now let's talk about this slider. So you see we have a before and after slider here. One of the things we can do is if we right click onto the node, go into properties, you see there's an option here, compare mode. Right now it's set to slide. If we click on this, you see that we can change it to click. So now we can do before and after with a click of a mouse. So it's really up to you which one you want to use. I like the slider, but the click is nice to use as well. Let's organize it the way I showed you in the beginning. And let's start off with the output nodes here. So what we want to do is make sure these nodes are the same size. So I'm just going to put this over this one and grab the corner and make sure they're roughly about the same size, right? If you recall, we installed the node Flux Continuum, and this one feature comes from that custom node. If you right click and go into Properties, you'll see an option here, Enable Tabs. Let's click on that, click on the checkbox, and you see that we have a tab option now. We'll go back into the same area here, Properties, and then you see this option has second tab. Let's click on True. And then we have a send back button. So the way this works is we can now toggle between save image and the compare image node. So if we click on send back, we can do our comparison. There you go, click. And then when we want to go back to the other node, we just click on save image or send back. So we can go between the nodes pretty easily here. Let's click the send back first, right click and select pin. This way it's not going to move. And let's select the save image one, pin that one down. And regardless of what we do, we can't move this anymore, right? Amazing. The other small option I want to show you guys is let's select all the nodes and right click over any one of these. And under shapes, you have an option here, default, box, round, or card. I'm going to select box, and you'll notice it's going to give us the sharp corners. You don't have to do this. If you like the round edges, just leave it. But when I rearrange things in a certain way, I do like to have these nodes with a sharp edge. Just looks a lot more cleaner. And the other thing we want to enable, let's go into our settings on the bottom corner here. And under light graph, you'll see an option here, always snap to grid. You want to click that on, make sure it's enabled. And you'll notice that when I move this around, you see it's going to snap, right? So that also keeps things nice and clean. Okay, so let's start organizing this. Now, this is my method. You can organize it in a certain way. One little trick I have for you, and this is great, especially if you're using GUF models or using the UNet models. You have the dual clip, the VAE, blah, 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 so many stuff. What you can do is select both of the nodes, right click over them, and then you'll see here, convert to group node. When you select that, we can give it a name, and I'm just going to call this checkpoint upscale loader. Click on confirm, and you see that it's going to combine those two together. We have the upscale node input model clip VAE. Now to keep things consistent, of course, we're going to give it the same box shape and color. But you see we have the upscale model at the top. We can fix that. So if we right click, go to manage group node. Here we can move them up or down so we can rearrange the order so that it makes more sense. And while we're in here, if you create more of these group nodes, there's a drop down here where you can select each one if you need to edit them, right? So we'll go ahead and click save. And you see now the order has the model first and then the upscale model after. Oh, and by the way, as you see it, remove the color and shape. So we have to do that again. And the cool thing is you can access this through the menu now. So if we right click, add node, at the very bottom, you'll see group nodes workflow. You're going to see the node that you just grouped in this selection. As you see, I've got quite a few group ones. So that's quite handy to have for sure. And while we're at it, we're going to do the same thing with these nodes, okay? This one we're not going to touch, but these three we're going to put together because they kind of go together. So we're going to select them all, right click, convert to group node. I'll just call it Upscale Sampler. And now you see they are all combined along with the inputs. And once again, I want to manage the group nodes because I like to have the scheduler and the sampler together. So that way I can just pick Euler, I can pick the scheduler and the steps. So it follows that same order. Okay. So again, let's give it a color and a shape. So the way I organized it is I have the LoRa loader here, and you typically want to keep them the same width. And then I think I had the load image underneath. Then I had the clip text encoders right beside it. And again, it's up to you if you want to resize this in any way you want. The Flux guidance node, I typically just close it and put it at the top. And the reason why I do that is if I'm going to use this workflow for SDXL, I can just right click over it and bypass the node quite easily. Or if I need to change the guidance, I can just open it up, change it, then close it again. But you could put it anywhere on your workflow. Then I take these two nodes and put them underneath. I'll typically have the sampler first, and then I'll put the DetailDaemon Sampler underneath. You actually might want to give this a bit of space just in case you want to use multiple loras. Totally up to you. Now, since we already have this guy pinned down, let's just move everything beside this one. We'll grab everything else. Now, if the connections are bothering you, just go to the bottom corner here and toggle the noodles on and off. That way you can kind of line things up properly. The sampler, you typically want a bit of space here for the preview. And then this guy, we can make quite a bit bigger actually. So I'm actually going to unpin this. Now we can pin it and then pin this one. And then lastly, if we select everything and right click outside of the nodes, we can select add group for selected nodes, which will give us this nice little background. We can call it Upscale Flux plus SDXL or whatever you want to call it. And go ahead and save your workflow. I would encourage you to put it on the same workspace that we've been working on. If I zoom out of my workspace, you see that I've done pretty much the same thing for all the workflows that we've worked on. So I have the standard generation area here. Then I've got image to image here. I've got in-painting here and then upscale here. Now, the one thing I did want to mention with this upscale process, upscaling is the last thing that you should be doing. I just chose to do this video first because a lot of you requested it. But typically my workflow generally is generate the image to image if I need to, fine-tune details with in-painting or out-painting, and then upscale. So for the next video, we'll probably do some in-painting. And maybe by the time you're watching this video, you'll see it on the screen pop up. But if this happens to be one of your first videos on my channel, this is a series of Comfyui 101 videos, so make sure to start from the beginning. But until that next video, my friends, I'll see you when I see you.